Guys, we need to address the elephant in the room, which is why does beige permeate almost every crevice of the design world and our cultural life? Everything is beige, and it's been beige for a while, and I really wanted to focus on that today. Whenever I do one of my aesthetic analyses, I usually get a comment from someone along the lines of, wow, this decade of XYZ is so well defined and amazing, and I wonder what the 2020s are going to look like to somebody in the future, because I don't know what are our times, man. Like, what our times look like. Dude, do you know what our times look like? They look like this. Our decade look like this, and like that, and like this. Of course, this is not the only thing that's happening, but still, you gotta admit, unless you've been living under a rock for the last 5 years, you do have to admit that this is the prevalent look of our at least first half of the decade. So I really wanted to focus on where that came from. Why did we start using beige as this to-go-to solution to our interior design, but also to our marketing, to our fashion, to almost to everything. It seems like the beige is the remedy to everything in 2025. I really want to focus on the reasons why we started using beige so much. What does that entail in terms of consequences? And also look at some of the recipes of the perfect beige interior, because either us or we know somebody who loves beige, but do you really know where those particular items come from? Who was making them first? All those little H&M home knockoffs that we have in our homes. Who designed them? Where did they come from? What movement made them possible? And I wanted to focus on all of this today. Hi, I'm Aesthety, your favorite aesthetic historian, and today we are talking beige. Beige on the desktop of Aesthetic Lounge. So the beige was here since the beginning of modernity. We can see the beige interior starting with the 20s and 30s along the lines of Art Deco. There is a first kind of beigification of the interiors, and along with the development of modernity as a design philosophy expressed in interior design and architecture, the beige was always ever present, sometimes on the forefront and sometimes in the back, but still, always there. The chief spikes of the beige in interior design as this all-encompassing color is, like I said, in the 30s, Art Deco. Then we get to 70s, where we start to have this sense of minimalism that is being established first in the 60s, but then really grounded by the times of 70s in works of highbrow architects for themselves as architects. Architects love, they love to experiment with the practices of the architectural theory. So usually they incorporate these things for their homes first, and usually that revolves around very high ticket clientele that they have. So initially minimalism as well as color drenching was something that was very kind of upscale up until really the times of the 80s and 90s. That was the first time that the beige took a hold on collective consciousness in a kind of a broader scale. We see this especially in the style that is now retroactively called Fraser-Bane, the style that is very prevalent in the set design of the Fraser. So in a nutshell, the Fraser-Bane was essentially a kind of celebration of the postmodern notions of Robert Venturi that he established as a kind of a contrast to the modernism. And throughout the 80s and the 90s, we have such a very firm grip of postmodern, especially in architecture and interior design. And while in the 80s, we see this form of celebration of the postmodern through the Memphis Milano style. All this wacky, zany, very 80s feel to this loud, brush, colorful designs. The Fraser-Bane was sort of a answer of somewhat aging generation of baby boomers. They are settling in and they look for something more subdued and less crazy and more conservative in its expression. Postmodernism invited this idea of coming back to ornament and historical references, but without the sentimentality of historical revivalism. They were supposed to develop new meanings. So we see all this little playfulness of the postmodern, but very, very toned down by the use of beige. So So that was kind of more serene antidote to the loudness and the brashness of the Memphis Milano. That kind of style, I actually think of doing the full-blown analysis on this style, but I don't know. Do let me know if you would like to see that. But yeah, that kind of style definitely taking hold of the 80s and the 90s. Then through the 2000s, we do still see some beige interiors, completely distancing themselves from postmodern ideas that now in the new millennium feel very, very old school in a way and very 90s. But then there is a huge thing that happened in the middle of 2000s that kind of flipped the whole scenario for the beige aesthetic. So up until the mid 2000, you can always tell that you look at certain interior that this is a 90s beige, or this is 80s beige, or this is early 2000s beige, or whether that is a beige that is second half of 2000s onwards. Because usually what we see in those earlier beiges is this orange undertone that's underneath it, but all the post mid 2000 is all this green tone beige that we still do today. It's much more, as we now call it, sadder, which I'm not a fan of calling it that way. Whatever might be sad for you, for other person might be just toned down or less garish, for instance. I don't know. It feels very personal. But yeah, we do tend to see this much more toned down and much more cooler beige with the green undertone, something that we still use today. Usually, whenever you see a beige interior that's very sunny and very, very orangey, very yellowy, you tend to have that feeling that it's a dated interior. Why did that happen? Well, for me, one of the pivotal moments was the movie Holiday. As you recall this movie probably, we get to see that in Cameron Diaz's character's home. We have this very subdued tonal neutrality to it, where, as the production designer called it, it's a very Belgian style of design. And I think it was very, at the time of this movie, it felt very fresh and very innovative. We all love, more or less, most of us love Nancy Meyer's homes in her movies. They are quite legendary. There are so many TikToks about it. And especially now, after so many years of sterile interior design, we circle back to those conversations of coziness in the home. And Nancy Meyer's movies have those set designs that people are kind of always referring to having those conversations, because they are cozy, they are quite lovely. They are something that's very aspirational, especially these days where we do struggle with the real estate market. And having this like homey homes is something that's such a renewed form of aspiration for many people. So yeah, having this beige, this colder Belgian style beige starting in Nancy Meyer movie is quite interesting, because it really was a design that felt very fresh. And it's such an interesting style because it feels very cozy, but at the same time very austere. It feels very airy, but at the same time kind of somber. And it feels like it's at the very, very threshold of masculine and feminine energy, which I think all of these things are so interesting. And it did feel very, very fresh at the time of premiering of this movie. And I think it really, really affected this kind of design sensibility from that time onwards. And we've seen that through, for instance, the adoption of this style by Restoration Hardware, where they had this full restructure thing going on in 2008 or 9, I think. And from now on, they adopted this kind of style of design that have those little elements of historical European design to it. And yeah, it did kind of develop itself as this premium style of a premium customer. It's quite interesting that this style was also developed after the time of the Great Crisis of 2008. It's an interesting thing what style took over the retail space that catered to the home decor in times of such a huge crash. And it kind of makes sense that it was all subdued. It's kind of reserved, in a way, and it's also very beige. So what was the cause of the current iteration of the beige interior? I would say that the primary culprit of what made this whole trend happen was Kim Kardashian's and Kanye West's home, designed by Axel Vervoort. You know the one. In 2019, Kim Kardashian and Kanye West premiered their home with, I think it was Vogue 73 Questions, the video on YouTube, and we finally got the glimpse of their home, which sent such a ripple throughout the internet. There was such a huge discussion about it because it was so weird. The home was crazy. It was such a humongous monumental building inside. The interiors were architecturally grand and huge, but they were so Kim called it futuristic Belgium monastery. There is this very intense sense of absence to those interiors rather than anything present within it. It doesn't have, the sense of absence is the ultimate presence. Conceptually, it is an interesting interior. I don't know if it's an interesting home to live in, but then again, I am not a multi-billion dollar celebrity who has hundreds of millions of followers on Instagram. So I don't know. I don't know. Maybe our reality would be very much skewed into different priorities. I don't know. I cannot relate to it. And I think that's the whole point. The point is not to relate. It was kind of laughable at first. People were tying this humongousness of space of their home to her vanity and her being vapid, the grand monastery of emptiness. In kind of disturbing way, in kind of colorblind way, where it's really hard for you to imagine that those people are actually having a family life in those spaces. And instigated a certain discussion about it because Kim Kardashian is as well as Kanye West are public figures. And there was this question about authenticity of this space. How much of that is just like a PR move? How much of that is just like a show space to them? I don't know. I mean, you can tell that those interiors were made to be talked about. So first they generated buzz because, Kim Kardashian may not be an artist. God knows she's a shitty actress, but she's a good marketer. She is a good marketer. You can say all you want about her. I'm not a huge fan, but I gotta, pay my dues where my dues are due. Give my praises where my praises are due. She is a brilliant marketer. Her and whole family, especially Kris Jenner. She is, the Emperor Palpatine of the whole enterprise. And that's legit. I do believe that. For me, Kim Kardashian is mostly and chiefly a content creator. That's what she is. That's how she maintained her fame for the last almost 20 years. Of course, she is a reality TV celebrity person, but her force of maintaining her fame stems from wielding social media. And I think, the Kardashian clan is very good at doing that. And there is a method to the madness, I would say. It makes sense for her to have a perfect backdrop that she does, as we can see throughout the years, she does customize for her content, for whatever she tries to evoke. And I think that's brilliant. From the perspective of content maker, it is brilliant to have a home like this. Of course, it really gotten into people because, Kim and Kanye have their own separate niches of fans. There's a quite big number of them as well. So obviously it did affect it. It did affect many people. People felt inspired. People felt like it really speaks to them. And there was such a huge ripple that went through the pop culture with clearly that is the starting point of where this beigification of our life started. That I would say that was primary cause. You can agree with me or you cannot agree with me. I really do want to know what you think about it, but I do think it was the case of Kim's and Kanye's home. But apart from this just being a trend following kind of a situation, the question primarily remains, why do we choose beige interiors? Why it became such a humongous thing throughout the years? I would say one of the reasons why it really took such a hold on society at large and why it was such a trend that not only caught on but also prevailed for so long. One of them is psychological. There will always be some people that will look for calm interiors, so it's not even the case of that style particularly, but this kind of beigification speaks to the perhaps bigger issue of us being overstimulated. The average time spent on our phones are 6 to 8 hours for many people, and throughout that time we usually get bombarded with the algorithms of random information that is just rolling in front of our eyes. So we do tend to be a little bit overstimulated. I think for the first time there's a generation that is as overstimulated as we are. So it kind of makes sense to seek out the interiors that for some people might feel as soothing, as serene, as a kind of a break from, the craziness of the world that's happening around us. And this beige really might be that thing. It does have a kind of a spa like feel, to me at least. It does. Even though I wouldn't go for such an interior myself, I do understand why certain people are like that. I think there's no point for maximalists and minimalists to argue pointlessly, because we seek out different parameters from our interiors. Some people like when you are enclosed in certain expression of form and matter and pattern around you, that kind of gives you, this is what speaks to you, and gives you a certain form of self-expression that's like an extension of you in that regard. But for other people, that might be too much, and they might want to run away from whatever stimulation they have around them.
Y'all, I really like my home to look like there's no signs of life because I'm that OCD. Like, I don't even want it to look like people live here, that people exist.
And who am I to judge, You do you, each to their own. I really firmly believe that. I also think psychologically there is also this effect of overstimulation from the baby boomer generation, because if you are a millennial like me, chances are that you were being brought up in a home that was very much cluttered. And that was also the case in my family home, where there was just so much stuff and there was no rhyme and reason to many things. It was a lot. So I think it does, for at least my generation, it does come from that place in our heads where we just want to declutter. Some people take it to such an extreme degree where they marry condo their whole life and they live in an airport terminal. That could not be me, but I can sympathize where that might be coming from. Also, I think there is an economical element to it. Like I previously said, with 2008 crash, we think of beige as easy to sell, and I think many people think about that. We do have a housing crisis. If you look at numbers, there are not many people that are owning their homes comparatively to previous generations, and many people are renting. They cannot even dream of having home for another decade or so. And I think landlords are also designing with mind of certain neutrality, so people will not get overwhelmed aesthetically and aim at the widest range of common denomination of tastes between people, and I think it is quite successful in doing so. So it's interesting that you can develop a beige home from the perspective of its market value. It's an easy thing to rent out, and it's an easy thing to maintain, and it's an easy thing to sell. I think there is this practical element to it. It's quite sad, I would, for all the reasons, I think this is the reason that's the saddest one, because it's really sad to live a life in a way that it's being filtered through the perception of disposability, that you have to liquidate your assets at any point because of such an uncertain times that we live in. But we gotta take it to our politicians, not to our decorators. Also, there is a sense of aesthetics to sustainability in terms of us to be practical about not trying to renovate as often. I think the beige, for me personally, I think it's the nearest that we approach to the timelessness of design. Of course, that's false philosophy, because there is no timeless design. No design is timeless. Just by the mere fact of things being overused, we try to drop them because we are just tired of seeing the same kind of repeated patterns of compositions. But still, we can aspire to achieve styles that have the furthest expiration date. In a way, we can aspire to find such designs, and I think that the kind of organic modern thing is as close, because of course it will age, but it will age very, very slowly, and it allows us to use it in the longest terms possible. But there's also a deeper reason, I believe, why beige really, really took hold culturally, and I think the reason is Instagram and social media. I think we are really, really downplaying the role of the grid of our feed and how we are perceiving it and how we are coming into contact with it and how it really affects the way we start to think about our presentation. So, we don't really talk about these things at large as a society, but we really do care about how our social feeds look like. There came a point where we stopped doing photos just because we like them. Like you don't take photos of your food anymore, or your dog doing whatever weird shit it's doing, because you are worrying that it's not going to work as a blob of photos next to each other. And because of that, I think we really are underappreciating the power of the grids that affected us aesthetically. We started to seek out for interiors that will be a perfect backdrop for a photo. If you have a beige background, it really makes you pop out the most. As well as you can incorporate any kind of color scheme on your clothing or whatever little elements that you want to present, because you have this perfect gallery like backdrop to it. And I think this is why Kim Kardashian as well did her home the way she did, because she needs a perfect backdrop. So we had this moment of like all gray, white and gray thing intertwined with the young adult of a millennial with all this hipster thing going on at the beginning of 2010s. Part of the reason why the Scandinavian design got so big, apart from the adoption of MacBooks and integration of tech into the attractiveness of the interior design, was starting to perceive the interior as a something beneficial in our photo making. The Scandinavian design with its, muted color palette and its a bit modernist and a bit sparse feel to it. That was the time when we really for the first time started to think about it seriously. There was, I don't know if you remember, but there was this like tendency to run your Instagram in a way how you always kind of desaturate all your colors and keep it very muted and very grayish, almost like clinical, almost lab-like. I don't know if you remember, but if you are a millennial, you probably do. And if you were chronically online at the time, you must remember. There was this lady that was running a blog called Love Aesthetics, and her name was Ivania Carpio. And she, I believe, was a precursor to this whole trend of having slightly desaturated, very clinical looking photos as a way to amp up digital appearance of our feed. She was the first one to develop this kind of a trend and this kind of aesthetic to those photos. And what Ivania Carpio done to the millennial gray slash this designer lab look to the photos, so did Kim Kardashian 10 years later with the beige. We still had those neutrals, but they were much more humanist and they were warmer and they were cozier. We have this like Japandi style, which mixes the Japanese influences with the Scandi, which is Scandinavian influences. It's this combination of transience and imperfection of wabi-sabi with the coziness of hygge. Also, in a way, I think there's this subconsciousness to, I don't know, playing around with people loving coffee. There's something about girls and liking beige and loving coffee. And I think it really plays off of this idea of, mocha spice frappuccino thing where interiors look like the way cappuccino taste is. I think there is an appeal to it. I don't know. Maybe that's stupid, but I don't know. I see it. I don't know if you do. Maybe do you? Do you see this as this little like? There's a coffee girls that like, I don't know, beige thing. So the beige blew up, for the last 6 years. We see this reiteration that just like trickled into almost any aspect of cultural life. Obviously, it works as a backdrop for photos, but also works perfectly as a marketing tool. We see beige utilized and developed into this whole aesthetic that is being used by so many marketing agencies. Like if you see those like boutique marketing agencies run by those couple of girls, every big city I think have a couple of those marketing agencies where you have all those like, Kaylee, Jenna and Ashley running around with their beige blazers and running social media showing that they play at work. It's one of those marketing agencies that are like, look at us being marketers, it's one of these things where you're like, okay, but what's your portfolio? Like, what are you doing exactly? Oh, it's just us doing coffee in the morning and we just sit down and we just buy nice flowers and we put the flowers into our vase and it's like, okay. And then we open our beige notebooks and then we do the briefing and then we do like a Canva presentation all in beige. And it's like, okay, but what's your product? Your lifestyle is your product? You having a work is your product? Okay, no shade to them, but you know what I mean. It's just like it is a certain archetype that there is like the beigeness is the lifestyle here. It's this like inner city. I work in creative industries. I'm probably a girl in my 20s having a life, having a cappuccino, running around in this kind of Carrie Bradshaw philosophy of my city life aesthetic philosophy thingy that I have. I don't know, there is something to it. I see that it trickles down to, the toys and the beige mom, the whole philosophy of beige mom, and denouncing your children by abstaining from any sense of them having color in life, which is crazy. You affecting the development of your child just for you to keep your color palette of your living room is kind of nefarious. And if you do not realize that, that is pretty fucked up. Even Kim Kardashian took an effort to show around that even though that her home looks the way it does, she is not a beige mom.
Just because you guys always say my house is so like minimal, well, you guys haven't seen my playroom.
She made sure for you to know that she's not that autocratic about these things, and that was a smooth move on her part, because it is an issue to deny your children color because they need that for developmental purposes, and you should know better as an adult. But I get it. I don't want to have my living room fucked up by some weird ass things just lying around and pissing me off. I do get that, but still you need to have your child well-being to the forefront of your priorities, right? But who am I to tell you? So it's this. There's this beigeness. Even it goes into like the font choices, those like exotic chic designs, and there's this whole prevalence of like there is a beige lifestyle. I even talked about it in my reel about the two influencers having a beige off in court where the one is suing the other for her stealing her aesthetic, and it's that thing where it started off as an interior decoration trend and it became a whole, like, if we would be 20 years back, I would say it's a subculture, but it's really a mainstream. It's like a mainstream girlhood, but not even girlhood. It's not particularly tied to women. It's everybody. It's literally like beige everything. If you go to H&M home, you can't buy anything that's not modern organic. Which brings me to another point, which is, do you know your references? If you're doing beige interior, okay, you do you, bestie. But at least know where the things are coming from, right? Perhaps you'd be more interested in finding out about people who participated, perhaps unwillingly, in the development of this trend, because we see their work as a blueprint of the staples that had been duped into oblivion these days. Vladimir Kagan with his boucle sofas, like that guy with his mid-century modern stemming from the atomic age shapes, the boomerangy shapes, he developed that into a couch, and to this day, it's such a staple of the beige aesthetic. Jean Royer and his chairs in boucle material that everybody seems to have or want to have. We've got the paintings of Franz Kiln and Willem de Kooning, and the abstract expressionism painting with today you can do the DIY versions of it, and it stemmed from the work of Willem de Kooning and also Franz Kiln. These are the OGs. All of the knockoffs from H&M homes that you see are really a rework of Jean Arp's sculptures from mid-century modern times, where he got into organic shapes of like seeds and elements, and he believed that sculpture is supposed to be a thing that kind of grows organically through its form, and he's the forefather of all those little knockoffs that you see in Zara Home today. Lucidi and Hans Koppe's ceramics, we see the proliferation of their designs in iterations. So it's nice to know where these things came from. It really irks me that there were people who really established these things and people are unaware because they just buy into a trend. Because the beige itself is supposed to be such a backdrop, they don't really think about the forms that were developed to create that backdrop, and essentially sending the OGs into oblivion. You may have a Jean Arp ceramic sculpture in your house and you are not even aware of that, which is sad. Those people were important. They established the aesthetic that is to go to for so many people, yet they seem to be so unnoticed these days. I think that those shapes that are like organic and curvilinear really speak to us because they kind of crash the sterility of the screen in which we are seeing them. It really feels tactile, It's not something I bought in H&M home, by the way. It's something that my friend made and gave me, and I will cherish that till the end of my days. It really speaks, especially to people through the screen, I think, is that very quality to it, that you can recognize its structure, you can recognize its texture, and it's something so at odds with the clean cutness of the screen. We can feel it with our eyes without ever touching it. And I think that's why all those organic like shapes really prevailed in this beige aesthetic, because we essentially do have beige interiors for the perfect backdrop of our photos to have it timeless, while having elements that are very structural so we can kind of touch it with our eyes and feel the tactility that is not allowed to us because it exists on the screen. So there's this tension of those meanings, and I think that's why it's such a prevalent design that keeps on giving. Even though that we are getting increasingly tired with the monochrome sameness of it all, it still has this cultural potency that, keeps on prevailing. And I think that's interesting. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. What do you guys think of the beige aesthetics? Do we like it? Are we not liking it? I'm pretty sure we are all tired with it, but we all have some opinions. Do let me know. I do read those comments and I do want to know what you guys think. Also, do you want me to discuss anything? If you have any ideas for me to do some topic on my aesthetic lounge in between my aesthetic analyses, I would love to find out as well. Just a little PSA, those aesthetic analyses will come back. It's not like I have changed my format entirely. It's just something that I do in between those analyses, as they take quite a while. Also, as always, like, comment, subscribe. Please consider supporting me, and thank you for my patrons. And yeah, see you next time.